desktop platform. Codename is Haswell-E. It features socket 2011-3 motherboards with the X99 chipset. Today we're going to be taking a closer look at the ASRock X99 Extreme4. Let's quickly run over the accessories that you get in the retail box. Of course, you're going to get a driver disc. Chances are there's updated drivers available from the ASRock website by the time you receive this disc, so it's best to go there, but you can load your LAN driver, for example, here to get yourself connected to the internet. You also get an ASRock case badge down there if you're into case badges. You get a software setup guide as well as a full quick installation guide, also / full user's manual. Make sure to keep those on hand while you're doing your build. And software setup guide in particular, ASRock has a bunch of apps. They actually have an app store that they've developed for themselves. So there's a lot of cool additional features you can get and extra functionality, so you guys can check that out as well. For serial ATA connectivity, we have 4 standard black serial ATA cables. All of them are SATA Rev 3 compatible with little clasps on them, and they have a couple with 90-degree angle plugs on one end and a couple with straight plugs on both sides. 2 SLI bridges are included in the box as well. They are rigid PCB designs. This board supports up to 3-way SLI and CrossFire configurations depending what CPU you have installed. So there is your 3-way bridge. They've also given you a rigid PCB 2-way bridge as well. If you're going with a CrossFire solution, chances are those CrossFire bridges will come in your CrossFire capable video card box. They have an interesting feature on this board which is called the HDD saver. Basically, you can route power from your motherboard over to power a couple hard drives and then use a software switch to turn those drives off for protecting the data or making sure that no one can access them at specific times when you want to turn that off. So that's an interesting feature they've integrated, and that's the cable for that. This is one small screw for your M.2 slot, and lastly we have a standard I/O shield right there for your inputs and outputs at the back. Here's the X99 Extreme4 motherboard itself, and apart from the color scheme, which as you can probably tell is mostly black, they've got a nice sapphire black PCB that they've designed going on in the background there, kind of a glossy finish on that. Also blue highlights throughout with some gray integrated in there, but overall a pretty nice looking motherboard. I do want to point out a few of the brand new features of this platform since it's enthusiast. The socket first off is socket 2011-3. It is not compatible with the former generation Sandy Bridgey or Ivy Bridgey enthusiast processors, so you're going to need a Haswell-E processor, and there's 3 of those available right now. More on that in just a moment. DDR4 is also now supported, so you're going to want to make sure you get DDR4. Again, not backwards compatible with DDR3, so you're going to need pretty much a full new setup for this. And lastly, of course, the X99 chipset, which has a lot of features that I'll be elaborating on in just a moment. Let me flip around to the back here for just a moment to give you guys another look at that PCB. Again, sapphire black is what ASRock is calling this, and a bit of a glossy finish on there, but we also have Phillips head spring-mounted screws for the heat sinks on here, so if you ever do need to remove those, you should be able to do so without too much difficulty. And then while we have a wide shot here, I want to point out the fan headers. You got a couple CPU fan headers up here in the top right, one 4-pin and one 3-pin. You've also got a 3-pin chassis fan header right here, another 3-pin power fan header right here, and then lastly one more 3-pin and one more 4-pin chassis fan header down there in the bottom right for a total of 6. We're going to take a close-up look at the board now, and I'm going to give you guys as much detail about this as I possibly can. We'll start down here in the lower right-hand section. So first off, we're going to have your standard front panel connectors right there, right next to the aforementioned chassis fan headers. You've also got the LED light there as well. This board does feature 2 BIOS chips, so you can see both of those right there, and you can switch back and forth between those. Those are also not soldered, so you can swap those out if it becomes necessary in the future. I already mentioned the HDD saver function, but that is the actual header for it right there, so that's where you can connect up that accessory cable to power a couple of your hard drives. Moving along the bottom edge, we have some USB 2.0 ports right there, so a couple of those. All of the USB ports on this board are natively controlled by the X99 chipset, so that is nice because that tends to give you the best performance and limited latency. Over here I have a couple functionality headers for switching between the different BIOS chips that are available, so you can use that to set that up. Also a clear CMOS available right there, although there is a surface mounted button on the back of the motherboard. You have a COM header right here. Over on the left you have a trusted platform module header, which is useful more so in corporate environments. And then finally on the far left we have a HD audio connector, and that is to connect up front panel mic and headphones. We have Purity Sound 2, which is integrated here by ASRock. So this is 7.1 channel HD audio with content protection, and it features the Realtek ALC 1150 audio codec. You can see an EMI cover right over the Purity Sound codec chip right there. They're also using higher-end audio capacitors on here. They have the PCB separation. You can see that line kind of running down here to provide some separation between the analog components of the audio as well as the digital components on the other side to reduce potential interference between those. 115 decibel signal-to-noise ratio DAC with a differential amplifier, as well as a TI NE5532 premium headset amplifier, which supports up to 600 ohm resistance headsets. So that's pretty nice there. Apart from that, we also have support for DTS Connect, and that's about enough for the audio for now. There are some more features of that, but I'll direct you to the ASRock website if you want to read up a little bit more on those functions. Also, they've integrated, again, a fair amount of software capabilities to this board. But let's talk about the PCI Express now here. We can see all of these PCI Express slots. There's a total of 5 of them. So we have, first off, our 3 main PCI Express Gen 3 by 16 slots. So that's the top one right here, this one right here, as well as this one right here. Now, there's actually 3 different CPUs available at launch from Intel. The 5820K has 28 PCI Express lanes, and the other 2 higher-end chips have 40 PCI Express lanes. So depending what chip you install, you'll have a different PCI Express lane configuration available here. You can do 3-way crossfire using these 3 slots with either chip, whether you're going with 5820K or a higher end one. If you want 3-way SLI, you're going to need to go for the 5930K or the 5960X for additional bandwidth, because depending again on what cards you have installed, you have different separation here, and with the 28-lane one, you'll end up having a by 4 connection on this bottom slot. Other than that, you can go with by 16, 16, 16, 8 for 3-way, or if you're using that 28-lane one, you'll have 16, 8, and 4. This physical by 16 slot right here is actually routed through the chipset, so this is PCI Express Gen 2 by 4. Then you have one last PCI Express Gen 2 by 1 slot right there for an additional add-on card. I also want to point out while we're in this area, this little connector right there, that's actually a Thunderbolt header. So if you want to purchase a sold separately Thunderbolt add-in card, you can route the cable over to that, and that will give you Thunderbolt connectivity, which has been missing from Intel's Enthusiast platform for quite some time. We have next-gen storage also available on this board. So this slot you can see located right under the main PCI Express Gen 3 connector is an Ultra M.2 slot. Now M.2 has a lot of variables to it. It can be a SATA connection, it can be PCI Express connection, it can be both. In this case, ASRock has gone with their self-named Ultra M.2, which means they've wired this slot up for PCI Express Gen 3 by 4, which is pretty much the most bandwidth that's available right now for an M.2 slot. That's up to 32 gigabits per second theoretical maximum bandwidth, which is pretty impressive. And then also, since M.2 cards can be different length, ASRock has put in support for pretty much everything. This Ultra M.2 slot is also 22 millimeters wide, which is pretty standard for most of the PCI Express M.2 SSDs I have seen. And we have support for pretty much all the lengths that are currently out on the market. So 2230, 2242, 2260, 2280, and 22110. And those are referring to the length of the card, of course. Right now this is set up for 2280. Apart from that, and moving on over to the right, we see our blue heatsink on our X99 chipset. So that's going to keep that nice and cool for one thing, but the X99 chipset also controls quite a bit of the functionality on this board. It has native support for not 6, but 10 serial ATA revision 3 6 gigabit per second drives. So there's all 10 of your ports right there. Pretty straightforward. 6 of these ports do have RAID functionality, so RAID 0, 1, 5, and 10 are supported there. That's indicated on the manual. And the other 4 still have AHCI support and full PCI Express Gen 3 connectivity. I'm sorry, full SATA revision 3 6 gigabits per second connectivity. So there's all your connectors right there, and they're all side facing, 90-degree angled. Moving up the side of the board, let's talk about USB 3.0, because we also have native support in the X99 chipset for up to 6 USB 3.0 connections. So this is your USB 3.0 front panel connector that will give you a couple ports on your front panel. There's also 4 more USB 3.0 ports on the rear I/O. Moving up the side, we have our main 24-pin motherboard power connector right there. And that's pretty much it for the right side. Let's talk about memory next. You can see our memory module slots right here. This is quad channel memory, just like we had with X79. So you're going to want to buy a quad channel kit. You want 4 matched DIMM sticks to make sure that you're going to get the best performance. Memory speeds for DDR4 start at 2133, and this board, at least as of now, has support for up to 2800, and I've seen both 2933 as well as 3000 speed listed, but this is a type of thing that as DDR4 memory production ramps up, we'll see faster speeds, and ASRock actually needs to get those memory modules in order to validate the higher speed. So we're potentially going to have higher speed support in the future as well. You also have support for up to 128 gigabytes of total memory installed, so that would be a 16 gig DIMM in each slot once those become a little bit more available. And then again, this is DDR4, so it's 288 pin. It is not backwards compatible with DDR3, so don't try to wedge DDR3 in there. And then some unique features about how ASRock has implemented their socket and compatibility. They actually have Xeon support. So apart from the three Haswell E desktop i7 SKUs that are available, we're also going to be seeing Haswell EP Xeon CPUs become available. There's actually an 18-core Xeon that this motherboard does support, so you can install that in the socket right here. And if you have a Xeon CPU installed, then that also improves your memory compatibility for more server-grade type functionality, so you can actually have ECC memory or registered memory installed as well. Again, bear in mind that's only if you're going with a Xeon processor. You also have 15 micron gold contacts in all the DIMM slots here, as well as in the CPU socket. And then you also have support for Intel's XMP 2.0, which is an easy way to dial in the rated speeds of your memory to set up with your processor. Speaking of the processor, here is our socket 2011-3 socket right there at the center. Very, very similar again to X79 and socket 2011, but again not backwards compatible. You got the two retention arms on either side that lift up and the delicate pins, of course, inside. It's still an LGA socket, so the pins are on the socket and not on the CPU. And then ASRock has beefed up the power delivery for the CPU you might have installed. They actually have a 12-phase power delivery design. They're using premium 60 amp power chokes. They've actually separated and have memory-specific alloy chokes as well for power delivery to the memory. They're using Nichicon 12K platinum capacitors. You can see some of those right there at the top, so really high-quality components they're putting in here for the power delivery. And then, of course, for support of that Xeon 18-core processors, you're going to want that 12-phase power design, and I would say particularly if you're going to be going with an i7 K SKUs or X Extreme Editions, because those are unlocked for overclocking. Here's a look at the aluminum alloy heatsink. This blue heatsink right up here for the power delivery, and above there we can see the 8-pin supplemental CPU power connector. That's about it for the CPU socket and memory, and let us finish here with a look at the I/O. Actually, before we do I/O, I want to point out we also have a additional power connector here, Molex plug. That will provide additional power to the PCI Express lanes. If you're going with a 3 or 4 card configuration, you might consider plugging that in, especially if you're going to be overclocking. Sorry, quick aside. Let's finish with the I/O right here. So first off over here, for you old school PS2 mouse and keyboard lovers, if you've got some of those hanging around that you really can't let go of, you have some legacy support here. So mouse and keyboard PS2 ports. We also have that external clear CMOS button located right there, which is very handy, so you don't have to get into your case if you need to clear your CMOS. You also have 4 USB 2.0 ports here, so a couple there and a couple there, again natively controlled by X99. ASRock has added on an eSATA SATA revision 36 gigabit per second port right there, so you can get some external eSATA storage. 4 more USB 3.0 ports, again natively controlled, an Intel Gigabit NIC, which is a very nice addition here and very welcome. And then lastly, here is your analog connections for your 7.1 channel audio, as well as an optical Toslink connection. And one last feature I wanted to point out about this motherboard is something ASRock is calling full spike protection, which is basically some electrostatic discharge protection, specifically for the I/O, even up to and including protection against lightning strikes, and also including the NIC connection, which is often overlooked in that particular scenario. But that is all for this video. Once again, this has been the ASRock X99 Extreme4 motherboard. Leave me a comment down in the comment section. Let me know what you think of this particular motherboard when it comes to the feature set, as well as the aesthetic design. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, give us a like while you're down there, and we'll see you all in the next video.